I want to show you something really cool, but it's going to take a little explanation, so please bear with me. You see, music theory is many things. It's a set of tools for better songwriting, it's a guide to more deeply appreciate your favorite tunes, and it's a language that describes a particular musical culture. But if I'm being honest, none of those are why I do it. No, to me, music theory is, first and foremost, an art form. That's most obvious with analysis. When I break down a song, I'm using someone else's art as a canvas to tell my own stories. But there's another aspect, an almost archaeological aspect, where we take simple ideas drawn from musical observation and follow them to their logical conclusions to see what we find. In many cases, we find nothing particularly interesting, but sometimes we get lucky and discover a beautiful, unexpected structure lurking in the shadows behind the music we love. I want to show you one of those structures. One of my favorites, in fact. It's called Cube Dance. It looks like this, and I still kinda refuse to believe that it's real. This video is sponsored by Nebula. Get 40% off an annual plan with a link in the description. Cube Dance was first invented, or discovered, or at least described by Jack Douthett, who was trying to answer a pretty simple question. How do we know if two chords are related? What does that mean? An obvious answer, although not the one he used, is that chords are related if they belong to the same key. So A major and D major, related. A major and D sharp major, not. We can even expand this and say that chords are more related if they share more keys. A major and F sharp minor fit together in 3 different keys, A, D, and E, whereas A major and G sharp minor only have 1 key in common, so they're still related, but less so. This is a decent system, and it does a reasonable job answering the question, but to demonstrate the problem with it, let me ask you this. Which is more closely related to A major? A minor or B minor? Now, I don't want to assume your intuition is the same as mine. Maybe it feels right to you that B minor is more closely related because it shares 2 keys to A minor's none, but to my ears, when I play them back to back, it just doesn't ring true. And yes, we can fix that by calling A minor a borrowed chord, invoking concepts like parallel minor, and adding other exceptions to cover up other holes in our intuition, but then we have to define how those new relationships fit in, which leads to more corner cases we need to correct, and eventually we're just gonna wind up with a structure that looks like exactly the thing we told it to be, and nothing more. It's useful, but it's not beautiful. All it reveals is what we set out to show. So, okay, let's start over. What went wrong? Why does A minor feel so closely related to A major? Well, if I had to guess, and this is the sort of deep, profound insight you only develop through 10 years working as a professional music theorist, but I think it's because they're both A chords. More specifically, they both contain the notes A and E, and the one note that's different is only different by a half step, either C or C sharp. They feel related because they couldn't be more similar without actually being the same. If you play them on a piano, it takes very little work to move your hand from one to the other, and as a listener, most of the frequencies are either identical or very close. So maybe that's a good definition. Maybe chords are most closely related if the total distance between all their notes is a single half step. Richard Cohn describes this as 1 unit of voice-leading work, and that's fun to say, so I'm gonna steal it. But what does that tell us? Like, we've gone from A major to A minor with 1 unit of work, but can we keep going? Well, if we take A minor and raise the E up to F, we get F major, implying these 2 chords are also closely related. And of course, F major is 1 unit away from F minor, and now we've got our first fun result. We got here by taking A major and one by one shifting each note by a single half step, so we've ended up on a chord where every note is a half step away. A became A flat, C sharp became C, and E became F. This is called a hexatonic pole for reasons that will hopefully make sense in a minute, and it's a pretty unusual sound. It's hard to even put a label on it in our old key center system, but by following through a series of intermediate chords, we've managed to pin it down as just 3 units of voice-leading work. Well, I say just, but we'll talk about how big that is later on. There's something else I've got to show you first. Following the same steps as before, the C and F minor can move up to give us D flat major, which then becomes C sharp minor, and this is where things get really exciting, because the G sharp in that chord moves up a half step to give us A major. We're back where we started. We've done a full loop through a series of seemingly unconnected chords, but by moving one step at a time, we've managed to show their hidden relationship. Douthett calls this a hexatonic cycle because we've got 6 chords that collectively use only 6 distinct pitches. 3 from A major, and 3 from F minor. Every chord in this cycle is some combination of those 2 sets of notes. But does this actually mean anything? Maybe we're barking up the wrong tree again. What we really need is a sign that this goes somewhere interesting, and we've got one. Let's just focus on the major triads A, F, and D flat. These are all a major third apart, and that, it turns out, is a very special relationship. It's balanced. If we go from A to F, we already saw that was 2 units of voice leading work, but importantly, it's 2 units of work in opposite directions. E moves up, C sharp moves down, so the average range of the chord doesn't move. And that's unique. No other interval does that. Like, if we move up in minor thirds, then by the time it gets back to A, the whole thing has shifted downward. If we keep this going, we'd eventually have to manually correct it by swapping octaves around to avoid disappearing below the range of human hearing. But with major thirds, and only major thirds, that doesn't happen. Going around this cycle keeps us in the same spot forever. And even when we add the minor chords back in, it still stays basically steady. And I want to take a second to recognize how unlikely this already is. It's easy to just follow the steps and go, yeah, okay, that makes sense, but like, does it? The fact that the hexatonic cycle exists at all depends on some very specific coincidences in our musical tradition. Remember, in order to get here, I said that D flat major shares 2 notes with C sharp minor, but on paper, that doesn't immediately seem to be true. One has D flat and A flat, the other has C sharp and G sharp. I'm pretending those are the same thing, and they are. Now, since the mid-18th century, most Western music has used a system of equal temperament where all the half steps are the same size, so whether you call it C sharp or D flat, it's always going to be the note halfway between C and D. It's 2 names for the same sound, which we call an harmonic. But before equal temperament, tuning in Europe was kind of a wild west, with a whole range of mean tone tunings, well temperaments, and other systems, none of which view these 2 notes as equivalent. And that's not just a labeling thing, they literally had different frequencies. In quarter comma mean tone, a pretty common 17th century system, the difference between C sharp and D flat is the difference between A major sounding like this versus this. It's a big deal. Back then, arguing that these 2 notes were the same was not going to make you very popular. Heck, I made a video arguing basically that last year, and I still got people mad at me, so clearly this is not a settled debate. But if they're not the same, our cycle falls apart. D flat major has to go to D flat minor, which leads not to A, but to B double flat major. And that goes to B double flat minor, G double flat major, and so on, spiraling out forever with increasingly preposterous note names. We need an harmonic equivalence, so we need equal temperament. But that's still not enough. More recently, some tuning theorists have pointed out that we might get better sounding intervals if, instead of splitting the octave up into 12 even steps, we split it into 19. Of course, whether that's true depends on your definition of better sounding intervals, but without getting too far off topic, I promise the argument does make sense. That's still equal temperament, because all the steps are the same size, but once again, the cycle is broken. A major can get to A minor with 1 unit of voice leading work, but if we try to move 1 step in the other direction, we don't get C sharp minor, we get this. Gross. That means each chord is most closely related to just one other chord, so instead of a circle, we have a stick. And there's not a lot you can do with a stick. So while past traditions mean our cycle never ends, this possible future means it might never start. We're in a Goldilocks zone. To get a hexatonic cycle, we need not just equal temperament, but specifically 12-tone equal temperament, and we just happen to live in the period of Western music history where that's the overwhelming norm. But this isn't a video about hexatonic cycles. Those are just building blocks because they still have a serious problem. It's a closed loop. We can build another one by starting on a different chord, and we can keep doing that until we've used up all 24 major and minor triads, but each one is completely isolated. There's no way to get from one to another with a single half step. And that's not great. Remember how I said A major and F sharp minor were really closely related because they shared 3 keys in common? Well, according to these cycles, they're actually pretty far apart because getting from one to the other takes infinity steps. Don't love that, let's fix it. So far, we've just been thinking about consonant triads, major and minor, but there's plenty of other 3-note chords. Maybe one of them can help. The first obvious candidate is the diminished triad, the only other chord that shows up in the major scale. Starting on A, we can raise the root to get A sharp diminished, so once again, 1 unit of work. But this chord is the same as B flat diminished, and that's 1 unit away from B flat minor, so hey, we found a bridge on our first try. We can move from this cycle to this cycle in 2 steps by walking through a diminished triad. This creates another special relationship, which David Lewin calls the slide, where you've got a major triad and a minor triad that share the same third. Or okay, in this case one of them's C sharp and the other's D flat, but we've been through this, that's allowed now. Point is, we've got a new kind of motion, which okay, we should probably start labeling these. So in the hexatonic cycle, we can move from a major triad to a minor triad in 3 different ways. We can lower the third from A major to A minor, which is usually called the parallel transformation. We can lower the root, like from A major to C sharp minor, which is usually called the leading tone transformation, but I don't like that name, so I'm just going to call it the mediant. Or we can jump across the gap to the hexatonic pole, which I guess we'll call the hexatonic transformation, but that's a weird one, and I don't want to deal with it right now. We don't need it. The parallel and mediant transformations each take 1 unit of work, and we can navigate around the cycle by alternating them. The slide, on the other hand, is a larger distance because it has to cross the bridge. It requires 2 simultaneous units of voice-leading work, but in exchange it lets us jump between cycles, dramatically expanding our reach. But this bridge is awkward, and it still hasn't really solved our F-sharp minor problem. We've got a distance now. It's 4 steps away from A major if we use the diminished bridge, but that means it's further than the hexatonic pole, which feels intuitively wrong to me. Let's keep looking. What about the sus4? Again, A major to A sus4 is 1 unit, so again, it can serve as a bridge, and again, there's a minor chord waiting on the other side. A sus4 is the same notes as D sus2, and D sus2 is 1/2 step away from D minor, so we've built another bridge to the same cycle. Huh. That's interesting. Wonder what that's about. Anyway, this move from A major to D minor is typically called the Nebenverwandt, which, as far as I can tell, is German for related. Really clever name, guys. Personally, I like to call it the negative transformation, but whatever. Point is, it's another super interesting chord relationship because it's what you get when you flip a chord around its root. Let me explain. A major is the note A, the note a major third above it, and the note a minor third above that. D minor, on the other hand, is the note A, the note a major third below it, and the note a minor third below that. It's the same structure, just upside down, and again, we can do it with 2 units of voice-leading work. But we still haven't found a satisfying path to F-sharp minor, and we've only really got one option left. The augmented triad. A major to A augmented is also 1 unit of work, raising E to E sharp, or F as the kids call it. If we just keep that train going and raise F to F sharp, then we did it! We found F-sharp minor in 2 moves. I probably could have just started here, but that wouldn't have been as fun. Anyway, this is another special chord relationship, the relative transformation. I said before that these 2 chords exist together in 3 different major keys, and that's unique. No other chord has that much tonality overlap with A major. It's also the only 2-step move that still has 2 notes in common, in this case A and C sharp, which explains why it feels so closely connected, and the fact that we keep finding important and interesting chord relationships is a really great sign that this approach is actually telling us something useful. So where does that leave us? We've got 2 single-step moves, the parallel and the mediant, and 3 double-step moves, the slide, the negative, and the relative. It turns out we can combine these 5 moves to accurately determine the shortest path from any consonant triad to any other, and that'll tell us how hard it is to voice lead that motion. How far would your hand have to move on a piano to play the 2 chords? And since all our basic steps require 1 or 2 units, we can think of that as a sort of cutoff. Chords within 2 steps are pretty closely related, chords beyond that aren't. 3-step moves like the hexatonic pole or the 1-5 relationship sit right outside those bounds, so they still feel connected, if not close, while chords with higher numbers are distant cousins at best. And in case you were wondering, the 3 furthest chords from A major in this system are G major, B major, and E flat major, which is interesting because 2 of those do share a major key with it. And that's important to recognize because I feel like we've we've kinda lost track of what we mean by related. In this context, I don't mean that more related chords sound better together, or that you should avoid distant relations. This is more a measure of how similar the chords are, and thus how striking it sounds to move between them. If you want something smooth, stick to small distances. If you want powerful, dynamic motion, that's when the bigger numbers come into play. But there's still one thing bugging me. These bridges are just so messy. Each cycle is connected to each of its neighbors by like 9 different intersecting chords, implying a whole complicated mess of harmonies jumbled up in the background of even a fairly basic progression. I'd love to be able to clean it up, and once again, 12-tone equal temperament swoops in to save the day. What a good tuning system. Anyway, an augmented triad is 2 major thirds stacked on top of each other, and in 12-tet, a major third is 4 half steps. 2 of those puts us 8 half steps above the root, which leaves 4 more until the octave, and that's also a major third. If you didn't follow that, don't worry, the point is that the augmented triad is symmetrical. A augmented is A C sharp F, C sharp augmented is C sharp F A, and F augmented is F A C sharp. They're all the same notes, so if we only care about voice leading, not chord roots, they're all the same chord. And that means all 3 of the major triads can actually connect up directly to A augmented and all bridge their way to F sharp minor with the same path. And it works the other way too. Each minor triad could be reached by one of these augmented triads, so we can collapse this whole convoluted mess of bridges into a single chord that starts in 3 places and ends in 3 places. That's maybe a little confusing, so here's another way to think about it. Let's start with the augmented triad and ask, with only 1 unit of voice leading work, where can it go? Well, if we lower the F, we get A major. If we lower C sharp, we get F major, and if we lower A, we get D flat major. On the other hand, raising F gets F sharp minor, raising C sharp gets D minor, and raising A gets B flat minor. We wind up with a little galaxy of chords, with the augmented triad in the middle and the other 6 orbiting around it. Any of these chords can do a 2-unit move to any of the others at any time by stepping through the middle. Kohn calls this a Weizmann region after Carl Friedrich Weizmann, one of the first theorists to systematically explore the augmented triad back in 1853. And these regions have a lot in common with our hexatonic cycles. Ignoring the augmented chord in the middle, they both have 3 major triads and 3 minor ones, and those overlap significantly. The 3 major triads in this Weizmann region are the same 3 major triads from our hexatonic cycle, and the 3 minor triads all fit in their own cycle next door. And perhaps most importantly, these 2 systems agree on distance. Whether you're looking at it in a cycle or a region, the move from A major to F major is always 2 units of work. On their own, the cycles and the regions are both closed off, isolated from their counterparts. But by cleverly overlapping the 2 sets of chords, each one bridges the gaps in the other, tying it all together into one massive, unbroken map of the triadic universe. But there's one step left. This one's mostly aesthetic, but it's still important. We've been drawing our hexatonic cycles as circles, but that doesn't feel right anymore. It puts some of them really far away from their respective Weizmann regions, which makes the graph look more confusing than it needs to be. If we just flip these middle 2, we get a little hourglass shape, but we also put all the major chords on one side and the minors on the other, which lets them connect up neatly to the augmented bridges, and now we finally have cube dance in all its wildly improbable glory. So why is it called that? Well, okay, so the thing is, with this new shape for the cycles, we can kind of imagine them wrapping around the edges of a 3-dimensional cube. That puts chords on 6 of the corners, and the other 2 are occupied by the 2 augmented triads connected to that cycle. We can then add another cube attached to each of those triads to show the other cycle it's connected to, and then we can wrap those around and... well, okay, it's hard to draw the geometry correctly, but conceptually, it works. It's not the only way to think of this graph, and honestly, I don't even think it's the most intuitive, but it's the one Douthett liked, and he found it, so he got to name it. That's a weird note to end on, so instead, here's one last trick. Now that we've flipped the cycles around, the graph becomes a lot easier to use if you think of it like a clock. The augmented triads are 0, 3, 6, and 9, and the strips of minor and major triads are the numbers in between. Now, if you want to see how far apart 2 chords are, you just find the distance between their respective clock numbers. A to D, that's 10 to 7 for a difference of 3, and that motion is, in fact, 3 units of work. This trick doesn't work for hexatonic poles, because again, those are weird, but you can do it for any other pair of chords. And it even tells you which direction. If you're going clockwise, the notes move down, and counterclockwise, they move up. That's why the major-third relationship is balanced. It's the only motion that doesn't change the clock number, so overall, the notes don't move. And so, it all comes full circle. Get it? Because it's like a big circle and you go around it like... Never mind. Point is, cube dance gives us a clear, structured way to talk about the relationships between chords that doesn't automatically assume that all music is played in major and minor keys. That makes it a perfect tool for describing styles where that's not really the case, like 19th century Romanticism and, honestly, a lot of recent pop. But it's not just a useful tool, it's also a beautiful diagram that embeds all these other lessons inside it, and trying to build it from first principles reveals a surprising amount about what these triads actually are. I told you it's my favorite, and I hope now you understand why. Last week, I got to do a really cool thing. I was invited to attend a Hollywood premiere for a new movie by a friend of the channel, Jessie Gender. Jessie makes a lot of phenomenal video essays, but recently, she took some time out of her busy schedule to instead make a phenomenal short film. It's called Identities, and it's a sci-fi thriller with a really unique perspective, exploring challenging themes like conformity, technological advancement, and, of course, identity. But it's not just a bunch of themes, it's also a really well-told story with incredible performances across the board by an impressive cast, including some other amazing YouTubers like Maggie Mae Fish and Abigail Thorne, plus John Delancey is in it. You know, Q from Star Trek. And as for the score, it is, in my professional opinion, really frickin' good. And yes, that's a technical music theory term, look it up. I had such a good time at the premiere, and well, you can't attend that because, it already happened. You can and should still watch the film on Nebula. Seriously. Nebula is a streaming service built by and for creators, and they fully produced Identities along with Jessie. I've been working with Nebula since the beginning, and I love how willing they are to invest in these sorts of ambitious, exciting projects from creators who otherwise might not get a shot. And they've got a bunch more in the pipeline. I'm especially excited for my friend Patrick Willems' upcoming horror film, too. But if you want to know more about Identities, I actually talked to Jessie about the project on my podcast, Ghost Notes, which is also produced by Nebula, so while you're there, you can check that out as well. If you don't already have a Nebula account, you can sign up with the link in the description to get 40% off an annual plan, which comes to just $30 a year. And if you do already have an account, you can go to gift.nebula.tv/12tone to give a year's subscription to someone you love, or even just someone you like. Nebula won't judge. And hey, thanks for watching, and thanks to our featured patrons Susan Jones, Jill Sungard, Howard Levine, Warren Hewitt, Damian Feller-Sutherland, Neil Moore, Jeff, and Michael Mole. Check out the Nebula cut for a fuller outro, and as always, keep on rockin'.